What happens when a billionaire's daughter realizes that all the money in the world can't buy the one thing she's always craved? Tonight, you'll witness a choice so shocking that it would challenge everything you believe about love, family, and what truly matters in life. When Emma Richardson makes an impossible decision between her family's fortune and a chance at real happiness, the consequences will leave you speechless. The crystal chandeliers of the Grandview Hotel ballroom cast dancing shadows across polished marble floors as Denver's most influential families gathered for the annual Heritage Foundation Gala. Designer gowns rustled against $1,000 suits, while champagne glasses clinked in carefully orchestrated conversations about tax shelters and yacht acquisitions. At the center of it all stood Emma Richardson, her emerald silk dress worth more than most people's annual salaries, yet feeling more alone than she ever had in her 29 years of life. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if stories about choosing love over money inspire you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have something truly extraordinary waiting for you. Emma adjusted the diamond necklace that felt more like a collar around her throat and surveyed the familiar faces surrounding her. These were the people she'd grown up with, the children of oil executives, pharmaceutical moguls, and real estate dynasties who had been her classmates at prestigious boarding schools and exclusive country clubs. They spoke in the same measured tones, shared the same rehearsed opinions about art and politics, and measured their worth in quarterly earnings reports and inheritance projections. As the daughter of Theodore Richardson, founder of Richardson Global Industries, Emma commanded attention wherever she went. Her father's empire spanned renewable energy, technology investments, and international development projects worth over $12 billion. At 29, she held 3 graduate degrees from Ivy League universities, spoke 5 languages fluently, and had been groomed since childhood to eventually take control of the family business. Everything about her life had been meticulously planned and executed to maintain the Richardson legacy. Yet standing in this room full of familiar strangers, Emma felt a profound emptiness that no amount of money had ever been able to fill. She watched the catering staff move through the crowd with practiced invisibility, serving appetizers and refilling glasses while the guests talked around them as if they were furniture. One server in particular caught her attention. A man in his early 30s with kind eyes and gentle hands, carefully balancing a tray while navigating through the crowd of distracted socialites. Emma had attended hundreds of these events throughout her life, but tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the conversation she'd overheard earlier between 2 pharmaceutical heiresses discussing their children like business investments, or perhaps it was the hollow laughter that echoed through the ballroom whenever someone made jokes about their latest acquisitions. Whatever the reason, Emma found herself questioning everything about the world she'd been born into. The man with the serving tray moved past her table, and she noticed the careful way he stepped around guests who barely acknowledged his presence. There was something about his demeanor that suggested dignity despite his circumstances, a quiet strength that seemed rare in her usual social circles. Would a particularly arrogant hedge fund manager deliberately bumped into him, causing him to steady his tray with practiced grace? Emma felt a flash of anger at the casual disrespect. "Excuse me," Emma found herself saying as the server passed her table again. "Could I have one of those appetizers, please?" The man turned toward her with surprise, clearly not expecting direct acknowledgement from someone in her position. "Of course, Miss Richardson," he said quietly, offering the tray with a slight nod of respect. Emma noticed the way he said her name, not with the calculated familiarity of social climbers or the rehearsed deference of paid staff, but with simple politeness that felt genuine. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw intelligence there, along with something else she couldn't quite identify. Weariness, perhaps, or resignation. What Emma didn't know yet was that this brief encounter would set in motion a series of events that would force her to choose between everything she'd been raised to value and everything her heart had always craved. The server, whose name she didn't even know yet, would become the catalyst for the most important decision of her life, a choice that would shock her family, scandalize Denver's elite, and prove that sometimes the greatest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the authentic connections that make life worth living. Tonight was just the beginning of a journey that would teach Emma Richardson what it truly meant to have a family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Emma Richardson stood frozen in the spotlight of the Heritage Foundation Gala as the reporter's question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The social media journalist from Denver Elite magazine had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, microphone extended and cameras rolling, ready to capture whatever scandal would drive tomorrow's headlines. "Miss Richardson, there are persistent rumors about your recent dating choices," the reporter pressed, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter of the ballroom. "Is it true you've been seen spending time with someone significantly below your social status?" Emma felt her cheeks flush as conversations around them gradually quieted, the Denver elite sensing drama like sharks detecting blood in the water. She'd been photographed last weekend at Washington Park with 8-year-old Lily Thompson, the daughter of one of her favorite baristas at the coffee shop near her penthouse. Emma had been reading to Lily on a park bench while the little girl's father, Daniel, worked a double shift to cover rent. But how had anyone connected those dots? "I don't know what you're referring to," Emma said carefully, her media training kicking in automatically. But the reporter was relentless, sensing weakness. "There are photos of you at Washington Park last Saturday with a child whose father works multiple service jobs to make ends meet. Some are saying Richardson Global's heiress has been slumming it with the working class." The cruel phrase hit Emma like a physical blow, and she felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her. In that moment of panic and embarrassment, with cameras flashing and society matrons whispering behind their champagne flutes, Emma's privilege and conditioning took over. She needed to distance herself from any suggestion that she would associate with people beneath her station. Her gaze swept across the room desperately, looking for an escape from the interrogation, and landed directly on Daniel Thompson. He stood near the service entrance, clearly recognizable even in his black catering uniform, his dark hair and kind eyes unmistakable. The same gentle hands that had waved goodbye to his daughter that morning were now steadying a tray of untouched appetizers. Time seemed to stop as their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Emma saw the exact moment Daniel realized what was about to happen. The slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of his shoulders as if bracing for impact. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them, driven by years of social conditioning and the desperate need to protect her family's reputation. "I would never seriously date someone like that," Emma declared, her voice carrying much further than she intended. "Someone who works service jobs and can barely support their own child. That's not the kind of life I want or the kind of father I'd want for my future children." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma immediately wished she could take back every cruel word, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could somehow capture them and swallow them whole. But the damage was done, and she watched in horror as Daniel's face transformed from surprise to deep hurt, and finally to a dignified resignation that somehow made her feel even worse. The reporter scribbled notes furiously while photographers captured the moment for tomorrow's society pages. Emma became acutely aware of Daniel's catering uniform, his calloused hands from years of physical work, his presence in a world where he was meant to be invisible. The tray in his hands trembled slightly before he set it down on the nearest table with careful precision. "Well, that's certainly clear enough," the reporter said with satisfaction, already mentally composing her headline. "Thank you for the clarification, Miss Richardson." Daniel straightened his shoulders with quiet dignity and, without a word, walked toward the service exit with measured steps that betrayed none of the humiliation that Emma knew she had just inflicted. She wanted to run after him, to explain that she didn't mean it, that she was just protecting herself from scandal. But her feet felt rooted to the marble floor as she watched him disappear through the swing doors. Patricia Richardson appeared at Emma's side within seconds, her smile bright and practiced for the cameras. "Well handled, darling," she whispered, wrapping her arm around Emma's waist possessively. "We can't have people thinking you'd actually associate with the help. Your father would be mortified." But Emma barely heard her stepmother's words. All she could think about was the look in Daniel's eyes, the flash of genuine hurt, followed by a resignation that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed by someone he'd trusted. The memory of his daughter Lily, who had called Emma the pretty book lady and hugged her goodbye with chocolate-stained fingers, made her stomach churn with guilt. As the crowd gradually returned to their conversations and the reporter moved on to hunt for other scandals, Emma realized she had just destroyed something precious without even understanding what it was. Her brief interactions with Daniel and Lily over the past few weeks had been the most genuine human connections she'd experienced in years, and she had just publicly incinerated any possibility of those relationships continuing. Standing in her designer gown, surrounded by people who measured worth in stock portfolios and inheritance projections, Emma had never felt more alone or more ashamed of who she was supposed to be. She had chosen her family's expectations over her own heart, and the hollow victory tasted like ashes in her mouth. What Emma didn't know yet was that Daniel Thompson wasn't just any service worker struggling to make ends meet. He had a story that would soon challenge everything she thought she knew about success, failure, and what it truly meant to build a family from love instead of money. As Daniel Thompson pushed through the service doors of the Grandview Hotel, he leaned against the cool concrete wall of the staff corridor and closed his eyes, trying to push down the familiar ache of being dismissed and devalued. The words Emma Richardson had spoken echoed in his mind. Someone who works service jobs and can barely support their own child. Each syllable felt like a physical blow, not because they weren't partially true, but because they came from someone he had started to believe might see beyond his current circumstances. For 3 weeks, Daniel had been looking forward to their brief conversations at Mountain View Coffee, the small shop where he worked the early morning shift before his afternoon catering jobs. Emma had become a regular customer, always ordering the same lavender latte and always taking time to ask about his day with genuine interest. She had met Lily during one of those Saturday mornings when his usual babysitter had canceled, and instead of being annoyed by the presence of an energetic 8-year-old, Emma had been enchanted. Watching Emma read stories to Lily in Washington Park had been one of the most beautiful moments Daniel had experienced since his wife's death 3 years ago. Lily had been so happy, giggling at Emma's dramatic voices for different characters, and for a brief moment, Daniel had allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to have someone care about both of them, someone who could be the maternal figure Lily desperately missed. But tonight's public humiliation reminded him why hoping for anything beyond their current life was dangerous. Daniel had learned the hard way that dreams could be devastating when reality crashed down around them. 3 years ago, Daniel Thompson was Dr. Daniel Thompson, a pediatric surgeon at Denver Children's Hospital with a promising career and a beautiful life with his wife Sarah and their 5-year-old daughter Lily. He had performed life-saving surgeries, published research papers, and been respected by colleagues who sought his expertise in complex cases. Their home in Cherry Hills Village had been filled with laughter, medical journals, and Lily's artwork covering every available surface. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday evening when Sarah was driving home from her job as a kindergarten teacher. The drunk driver who ran the red light at the intersection of Hampton and University had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. Sarah died instantly, leaving Daniel to navigate grief while trying to comfort a 5-year-old who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. The first year after Sarah's death had been a blur of funeral arrangements, insurance battles, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lily while his own world fell apart. Daniel had taken extended leave from the hospital, using up all his vacation time and sick days to be present for his daughter, who was having nightmares and panic attacks whenever he left her sight. When he finally returned to work, Daniel discovered that his grief had affected his surgical precision in ways that made him question his ability to hold other people's children's lives in his hands. The first time his hands trembled during a procedure, he had managed to complete the surgery successfully, but the fear that followed was overwhelming. What if next time he wasn't so lucky? What if his personal trauma cost another family their child? The medical malpractice lawsuit that followed a complicated surgery 6 months later had been the final blow. Although Daniel had followed proper procedures and the patient had ultimately recovered fully, the family claimed his emotional instability following his wife's death had compromised their child's care. The hospital's insurance company decided to settle rather than fight, but the settlement required Daniel to resign and agree to a non-compete clause, which effectively banned him from practicing surgery in Colorado for 5 years. Suddenly, Daniel found himself a widowed single father with a massive mortgage, medical school debt, and no way to use the only professional skills he had ever developed. The savings he and Sarah had accumulated were quickly depleted by legal fees and living expenses. Within 18 months, he had lost their house, moved to a small apartment in a less expensive neighborhood, and taken whatever work he could find to support Lily. If this story is hitting close to home for anyone who's had to rebuild their life from scratch, let us know in the comments. Your experiences matter, and sometimes sharing our struggles helps others feel less alone. The transition from respected surgeon to service worker had been humbling in ways Daniel never could have imagined. The morning shift at Mountain View Coffee paid $12 an hour plus tips. The afternoon catering work brought in additional income, but required him to stand in rooms full of people who had everything he had once taken for granted. Evening shifts at a local restaurant rounded out his schedule, allowing him to just barely cover rent, childcare, and Lily's needs. The hardest part wasn't the physical exhaustion of working 3 jobs or the constant worry about money. It was watching Lily try to understand why their life had changed so dramatically. She remembered their old house with the big backyard and her own princess-themed bedroom. She asked why they couldn't afford dance classes anymore and why Daddy always looked so tired. At 8 years old, she was too young to understand medical malpractice lawsuits and non-compete clauses, but old enough to know that something fundamental had shifted in their world. Daniel had become an expert at stretching every dollar, shopping clearance sales, and finding free activities to keep Lily entertained. The library's Saturday story time had become their weekly tradition, which was how they had ended up at Washington Park that afternoon when Emma had offered to read to Lily. For those 20 minutes, watching his daughter laugh with genuine joy while a kind stranger brought stories to life, Daniel had felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: hope. Now, standing in the hotel's service corridor, that hope felt like the cruelest joke of all. Emma Richardson lived in a world where $12 an hour wages seemed pathetic, where single fathers struggling to rebuild their lives were sources of embarrassment rather than admiration. She probably spent more on a single dinner than Daniel made in a week, and her casual dismissal of his circumstances reminded him exactly where he stood in Denver's social hierarchy. But what hurt most wasn't the money differential or even the public humiliation. It was the knowledge that Lily had been genuinely excited about the pretty book lady who had promised to read more stories to her next weekend. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that their new friend had decided they weren't good enough for her company? How could he protect his daughter from the kind of rejection that came from being judged unworthy based on circumstances beyond their control? Daniel straightened his uniform, picked up his empty tray, and prepared to finish his shift. Tomorrow he would work the morning shift at the coffee shop, hoping Emma wouldn't appear for her usual lavender latte. He would smile at other customers, make small talk about the weather, and pretend that his heart hadn't been broken by someone who had briefly made him believe that their story might have a different ending. What Daniel didn't know was that 2 floors above him, Emma Richardson was having her own crisis of conscience, realizing that her words had destroyed something infinitely more valuable than any amount of money could buy. And sometimes when 2 people are meant to find each other, even the cruelest words can't permanently destroy the connection that matters most. At 3 in the morning, Emma Richardson stood in her penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Denver, still wearing her emerald gala dress but feeling stripped of everything that had once made her feel secure. The city lights sparkled below like scattered diamonds, but all she could see in the reflection of her floor-to-ceiling windows was Daniel's face the moment she had spoken those devastating words. Her penthouse was a monument to wealth and isolation. 12,000 square feet of designer furniture, museum-quality artwork, and the kind of silence that money could buy. Everything had been selected by professional decorators who specialized in creating environments that photographed well for architectural magazines. But standing in this perfect space, Emma realized she couldn't remember ever feeling truly at home here. The wine she had poured sat untouched on her Italian marble countertop as she replayed the evening's events. She had achieved exactly what Patricia and her father would have wanted, publicly distancing herself from any association with the working class, maintaining the Richardson family's carefully cultivated image of exclusivity. Yet the victory felt like the cruelest defeat of her life. Emma walked to her home office and opened her laptop, typing Daniel Thompson, Denver into the search engine without knowing what she hoped to find. The results were sparse at first, a few mentions in hospital newsletters from years ago, a research paper on pediatric cardiac procedures, and then she found what she was looking for. An obituary from 3 years ago for Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, beloved kindergarten teacher and mother. The obituary painted a picture of a vibrant woman who had dedicated her life to educating children and supporting her surgeon husband. There were mentions of her volunteer work at literacy programs, her passion for gardening, and the profound love she had shared with Daniel and their daughter Lily. The final paragraph mentioned memorial donations to the Children's Hospital Foundation and the Denver Public Library's Children's Reading Program. As Emma read further, she discovered articles about the drunk driving accident that had claimed Sarah's life. The driver, a repeat offender, had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, but no amount of justice could restore what the Thompson family had lost. Emma found herself staring at a photograph of Daniel from that time period, younger, wearing surgical scrubs, his arm around Sarah, who was laughing at something outside the camera's frame. The transformation from that happy man to the quiet, guarded person she had met at the coffee shop began to make devastating sense. Emma continued searching and found the medical malpractice case that had ended Daniel's career. The details were sealed, but news reports suggested that a family had claimed Daniel's grief over his wife's death had affected his surgical performance. The case had been settled out of court, with Daniel agreeing to leave his position at the hospital. Emma closed her laptop and walked back to the windows, seeing the city with new eyes. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably lying awake in whatever small apartment he could afford, trying to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old girl why the woman who had promised to read her more stories would never be coming back. The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. She hadn't just hurt Daniel tonight. She had broken a promise to a child who had already lost her mother, who had been excited about their friendship, who had probably been planning to tell her school friends about the pretty book lady who made stories come alive with funny voices and dramatic gestures. Emma's own childhood had been nothing like Lily's experience of loss and resilience. As the only child of Theodore Richardson, Emma had grown up in a world of private tutors, boarding schools, and summers at European estates. Her mother, Eleanor, had died when Emma was 15, not in a sudden accident, but after a long battle with cancer that had been fought in the world's most expensive hospitals with the most renowned specialists. Even grief in the Richardson family had been a carefully managed affair. There had been no time for the raw, devastating sorrow that Daniel must have experienced. Instead, Emma had been expected to channel her loss into academic achievement and preparation for her eventual role in the family business. Grief was a luxury the Richardson heir couldn't afford, according to her father. Theodore Richardson had remarried within 2 years, choosing Patricia not for love, but for strategic alliance. Patricia's family owned a chain of luxury hotels that complemented Richardson Global's real estate portfolio. Their marriage had been featured in Forbes as a power couple merger that would strengthen both empires. Emma's relationship with Patricia had always been complicated. Her stepmother was elegant, intelligent, and utterly focused on maintaining the family's social status. Patricia had never tried to replace Emma's mother, but she had made it clear that Emma's behavior reflected on the entire Richardson legacy. Every public appearance, every relationship, every decision was viewed through the lens of how it would affect their standing in Denver's elite circles. Growing up in this environment, Emma had learned early that love was conditional, relationships were strategic, and authentic emotions were weaknesses that could be exploited by business rivals or social climbers. She had attended the best schools, earned multiple degrees, and dated men who looked perfect on paper, but felt nothing like home. The closest thing to genuine affection Emma had experienced in recent years had been her brief interactions with Daniel and Lily. When Lily had hugged her goodbye after their story time in the park, the child's small arms around her waist had felt like the most real thing Emma had touched in months. When Daniel had thanked her for her kindness to his daughter, his smile had been free of the calculation that characterized every other relationship in her life. Now she had destroyed that authenticity in favor of protecting a reputation built on inherited wealth and social expectations. The irony wasn't lost on her that the Richardson family fortune had been built by her grandfather, a man who started with nothing and worked his way up through sheer determination and business acumen. Yet somehow, 3 generations later, his descendants had become the kind of people who looked down on others for doing exactly what he had done, working hard to support their families. Emma thought about the children's literacy program that Sarah Thompson had supported, the same cause that the Richardson Foundation claimed to champion through carefully orchestrated charity events. How many families like the Thompsons could have been helped with the money spent on tonight's gala alone? How many single parents struggling to rebuild their lives could have been supported instead of judged? For the first time in her adult life, Emma felt genuinely ashamed of her privilege. Not because she had been born into wealth, but because she had used that privilege as a weapon against someone who deserved compassion, not condemnation. Daniel Thompson had lost his wife, her career, and his financial security. Yet he was still working 3 jobs to provide for his daughter while maintaining his dignity and kindness. As the sun began to rise over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma made a decision that would have shocked everyone who thought they knew her. She was going to find a way to make amends for her cruelty, even if Daniel never forgave her for it. More importantly, she was going to figure out how to become the kind of person who deserved the friendship of someone like Lily Thompson, someone who measured worth in hugs and laughter rather than stock portfolios and social status. Emma Richardson had spent 29 years learning how to be the perfect heiress. Now she needed to learn how to be a decent human being, and she suspected that journey would be the most challenging thing she had ever attempted. But for the first time since her mother's death, she felt like she had a purpose that mattered more than maintaining the family image.
3 days after the gala, Emma Richardson found herself doing something she had never done before, riding the public bus to a neighborhood she had only seen from her car windows. The number 15 route took her through downtown Denver, into the working-class community of Westwood, where Daniel and Lily lived, according to the address she had found through her research. Emma had spent those 3 sleepless nights formulating and discarding various plans for making amends. She had considered sending flowers, writing a check, or having her assistant arrange some grand gesture. But every option felt hollow and insulting, the kind of privilege-driven solution that would only make the situation worse. If she was going to apologize meaningfully, she needed to step outside her comfortable world and meet Daniel on his terms. The bus ride was an education in itself. Emma watched single mothers juggling tired children and grocery bags, elderly people carefully counting change for their fare, and workers in uniforms heading to early morning shifts. These were the people who cleaned her office building, prepared her food, and maintained the infrastructure of her privileged life. Yet she had never bothered to really see them before. Mountain View Coffee occupied a corner space in a small strip mall, its hand-painted sign and mismatched furniture a stark contrast to the artisanal coffee shops in Emma's usual downtown haunts. Through the window, she could see Daniel behind the counter, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the morning rush, his movements efficient as he prepared drinks for a steady stream of customers. Emma sat on a bench across the street for nearly an hour, watching the rhythm of Daniel's workday and trying to gather the courage to face him. She observed how he remembered regular customers' orders, how he smiled patiently when someone fumbled with their payment, and how he took time to chat with an elderly man who seemed lonely. This was the same person she had publicly dismissed as unworthy of her consideration. When the morning rush finally slowed, Emma crossed the street and pushed through the coffee shop's door. The bell above chimed cheerfully, and Daniel looked up from the espresso machine he was cleaning. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted from professional welcome to guarded surprise. "What can I get for you?" he asked quietly, his voice carefully neutral. "A lavender latte," Emma said, then immediately felt foolish for ordering her usual drink as if nothing had changed between them. "And a few minutes of your time, if you're willing." Daniel's coworker, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair and kind eyes, glanced between them with obvious curiosity. "I can cover the counter," she offered, seeming to sense the tension in the air. "Thanks, Mia," Daniel said, preparing Emma's drink with the same careful attention he had always shown, though his movements were more mechanical now. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and Emma felt an electric shock of recognition. Not romantic, exactly, but the acknowledgement of a connection that hadn't been completely severed by her cruel words. They sat at a small table near the window, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. Emma had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting across from Daniel, seeing the carefully controlled hurt in his eyes, all her prepared words evaporated. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," Emma began, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I need to tell you how sorry I am for what I said at the gala. There's no excuse for my cruelty, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I couldn't live with myself without at least trying to apologize." Daniel studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether her remorse was genuine. "Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the public humiliation or even the personal rejection. It was explaining to Lily why the pretty book lady wouldn't be reading to her anymore." Emma's heart clenched painfully. "How is she?" "Confused. Hurt. She spent all day Sunday asking if she had done something wrong to make you not like her anymore." Daniel's voice remained steady, but Emma could see the protective anger beneath his calm exterior. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to question her worth because of adult cruelty. "You're absolutely right," Emma said, tears threatening to spill over. "I broke a promise to a child who had already lost so much. That's unforgivable. She asked me if it was because we're poor, if that's why pretty ladies in nice dresses don't want to be our friends." Emma pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of damage her thoughtless words had caused. "Daniel, I researched you after that night. I know about Sarah, about your medical career, about everything you've lost and overcome. You're not just someone who works service jobs. You're a surgeon who lost everything trying to heal other people's children while grieving your wife. You're a father who works 3 jobs to provide for your daughter. You're extraordinary, and I was too blinded by my own privilege to see it." Daniel's expression softened slightly, surprise replacing some of the guardedness. "You looked into my background? I needed to understand who I had hurt, and what I found made me realize that you represent everything I was taught to value but have never actually practiced. Integrity, hard work, putting family before personal gain. My grandfather built our fortune from nothing, but somehow his descendants became the kind of people who looked down on others for doing exactly what made him successful." A customer entered the shop, and Daniel glanced toward the counter where Mia was handling the order. When his attention returned to Emma, his posture had relaxed slightly.
"Why are you here, Emma?" he asked, using her first name for the first time since that night. "What do you want from this conversation?" Emma took a breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether any kind of redemption was possible. I want to know if there's any way I can make this right with Lily, not for my own conscience, but because she deserves better than being collateral damage and adult mistakes. And I want to understand how someone like you maintains such grace under circumstances that would have destroyed someone like me. Someone like you? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Someone who's never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. Someone who's never lost anything that couldn't be replaced with money. Someone who's never had to explain to a child why the world can be cruel for no good reason. Daniel was quiet for several minutes, studying Emma's face as if trying to solve a complex equation. Finally, he spoke. Lily has a school presentation next Friday about community helpers. She's supposed to interview someone who makes a difference in people's lives. She was planning to interview you before... He trailed off. Before I proved I wasn't worth her admiration. Emma finished. She still talks about you, Daniel admitted reluctantly. She drew a picture of you reading stories in the park. It's hanging on our refrigerator next to her spelling tests and artwork from school. Emma felt tears finally spill over. Would it be possible for me to apologize to her directly, not to make myself feel better, but because she deserves to know that what happened wasn't her fault? Daniel considered this carefully. She gets out of school at 3:15. We usually go to Sloan's Lake Park afterwards so she can play before I have to get ready for my evening shift. If you wanted to meet us there today, you could explain things in a way that an 8-year-old could understand. I'll be there, Emma said immediately. And Daniel, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it. As Emma prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Can I ask you something? How do you do it? How do you stay kind and hopeful when life has taken so much from you? Daniel smiled for the first time since she had entered the shop, and Emma glimpsed the man Sarah must have fallen in love with. Because Lily is watching. She needs to learn that the world can be beautiful and good even when it's also difficult and unfair. If I become bitter, I steal that possibility from her, and Sarah would never forgive me for that. As Emma left the coffee shop and waited for the bus back to downtown, she realized that Daniel Thompson had just given her the most valuable lesson of her privileged life. True strength wasn't measured in bank accounts or social status, but in the ability to choose hope and kindness even when life had every reason to make you cruel. Emma arrived at Sloan's Lake Park 30 minutes early, her hands trembling as she sat on a bench overlooking the water. She had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater, the most casual outfit she owned, though it probably cost more than Daniel made in a week. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she hoped the gesture would show she was trying to meet them on equal ground. The autumn air was crisp, and families with children dotted the playground area. Emma watched parents pushing their kids on swings, helping them navigate monkey bars, and mediating playground disputes with the kind of patient love she had rarely witnessed in her own childhood. Every interaction reminded her of what she had observed between Daniel and Lily in Washington Park, the natural ease of a father who put his daughter's happiness above everything. At exactly 3:20, Emma spotted them walking along the path that circled the lake. Daniel carried a small pink backpack decorated with unicorns, while Lily skipped beside him, her dark curls bouncing with each step. Even from a distance, Emma could see the little girl's animated gestures as she told her father about something that had happened at school. When Lily spotted Emma on the bench, her steps faltered. The 8-year-old moved closer to her father, suddenly shy, and Emma's heart broke at the uncertainty in the child's posture. This was the same little girl who had fearlessly asked Emma to read different voices for each character, who had laughed with pure joy at story time, who had hugged her goodbye with complete trust. "Hi, Lily," Emma said softly as they approached, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "Thank you for meeting me. I have something very important to tell you." Lily looked up at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Miss Emma wants to talk to us." "Are you still the pretty book lady?" Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Daddy said you might not want to read stories anymore." "I will always be the book lady if you want me to be. But first, I need to apologize to you for something very important. Can we sit on this bench together?" The three of them settled on the park bench, with Lily between Emma and Daniel. Emma had rehearsed this conversation extensively, knowing that explaining adult cruelty to a child required careful consideration of both honesty and age-appropriate language. "Lily, do you remember when we met at the park and I promised to read more stories with you?" Emma began. "Yes! You said you would come back and bring the book about the princess who saved the kingdom with kindness. You promised." Lily's voice held a note of accusation that was heartbreaking in its directness. "You're absolutely right. I did promise that, and I broke my promise. That was wrong of me, and I want you to know that breaking promises to children is never okay." Emma took a careful breath. "But I need you to understand something very important. The reason I broke my promise had nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong at all." Lily tilted her head, considering this. "Then why didn't you come back? Daddy said you were busy with rich people things." Emma glanced at Daniel, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're scared or confused. I was afraid that other people would think I shouldn't be friends with you and your daddy because we come from different kinds of families. That was a very silly fear, and I made a very bad choice because of it." "What kind of different?" Lily asked with the direct curiosity that only children possessed. Emma chose her words carefully. "Well, my family has a lot of money, and your family doesn't have as much money. Some people think that means we can't be friends, but that's not true at all. Some of the kindest, smartest, most wonderful people I know don't have very much money. Your daddy is one of them." Lily considered this seriously. "Money doesn't make people nice. Mrs. Patterson at school has lots of money, and she's mean to the lunch ladies. But Maria's mom doesn't have much money, and she always brings extra snacks to share with kids who forget their lunch." The wisdom in this observation from an 8-year-old struck Emma profoundly. "You're absolutely right, Lily. You're very smart to understand that. So you were scared that people would be mean to you for being our friend?" Lily's voice held genuine concern, as if she was worried about Emma's feelings rather than her own hurt. "Yes, and that fear made me say some very unkind things about your daddy in front of other people. I said things that hurt his feelings, and that probably hurt your feelings too. I'm very, very sorry for that." Lily was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs from the bench. "Daddy says sorry is just a word unless you change your behavior. Are you going to change your behavior?" Emma looked at Daniel with surprise and admiration. He was raising a daughter who understood accountability at 8 years old better than most adults ever would. "Yes, I am going to change my behavior. I want to learn how to be a better person, someone who keeps promises to children and doesn't let fear make me mean to good people like you and your daddy." "Okay," Lily said with a matter-of-fact acceptance that children often showed when adults were genuinely honest with them. "Can you read to me now? I brought the princess book from the library just in case." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. Despite everything, this little girl was still willing to trust her. "I would love to read to you. But first, can I ask you about your school presentation? Your daddy mentioned you're learning about community helpers." Lily's face lit up with excitement. "Yes, I have to interview someone who makes a difference in people's lives. I was going to interview you before." she trailed off, suddenly remembering their interrupted plans. Before I let you down, Emma finished gently. Would you still like to interview me? I'm not sure I'm the best example of someone who helps the community, but I'm trying to learn how to be better. What do you do for work? Lily asked, pulling a small notebook and pencil from her backpack with the seriousness of a professional journalist. Emma found herself in the unusual position of trying to explain her role at Richardson Global in terms an 8-year-old would understand. Well, my family's company builds things that help people, like affordable housing for families who need homes, and renewable energy projects that protect the environment. Do you build the houses yourself? Lily asked, pencil poised over her notebook. No, I mostly make decisions about where to build them and how to pay for them. Other people do the actual building, people like construction workers and architects and engineers. Like how Daddy used to fix children's hearts in the hospital? Lily asked proudly. Emma glanced at Daniel, who remained quiet during their conversation. Yes, exactly like that. Your daddy saved children's lives by being a surgeon. That's much more important than what I do. But if you didn't decide where to build houses, then families wouldn't have houses, Lily pointed out with 8-year-old logic. So you help too, just in a different way. The interview continued for 20 minutes, with Lily asking thoughtful questions about Emma's work, her foundation, and her plans for helping people. Emma found herself being more honest about her privileged position and her desire to use it more meaningfully than she had ever been in any business meeting. When they finished, Lily carefully closed her notebook and looked up at Emma with serious eyes. I think you would be a good community helper if you remember to keep your promises and don't let mean people make you scared of being nice to good people like you and your daddy. That's very good advice, Emma said solemnly. I'm going to remember that.
As Emma read the princess story to Lily, using different voices for each character, just as she had in Washington Park, she realized something profound was happening. This 8-year-old girl, who had every reason to distrust adults who broke promises, was teaching her about forgiveness, accountability, and the kind of unconditional acceptance that Emma had never experienced in her family of origin. When Daniel announced it was time to go home so he could get ready for his evening shift, Lily hugged Emma goodbye with the same enthusiasm she had shown weeks earlier. "Will you come read stories again next week?" Lily asked. "If your daddy says it's okay, I would love to," Emma replied, looking at Daniel questioningly. Daniel studied Emma's face for a moment before nodding. "We'll be here same time next Friday." As Emma watched them walk away, Daniel's hand securely holding his daughter's, she realized that Lily Thompson had just given her something more valuable than all the Richardson family wealth combined: a second chance to prove she could be worthy of a child's trust. If you've ever experienced the incredible forgiveness that children can show us when we're honest about our mistakes, share your story in the comments. Sometimes the youngest among us teach the most important lessons about grace and redemption. Over the following weeks, Friday afternoons at Sloan's Lake Park became the highlight of Emma's week. What had started as an apology session evolved into something she had never experienced before: the simple joy of spending time with people who valued her presence rather than her bank account. Emma found herself looking forward to Lily's animated stories about school, her thoughtful questions about the world, and the easy way she could make both adults laugh with her 8-year-old observations about life. During their third meeting, Lily announced that her school presentation had earned her an A+, and that she had told her entire class about her friend who helps families find homes and makes the air cleaner with special buildings. The pride in the little girl's voice when she talked about Emma's work made Emma realize she had never felt such genuine validation, even after closing million-dollar deals. "Miss Emma," Lily said one afternoon as they sat by the lake watching ducks paddle across the water, "why don't you have any kids? You're really good at reading stories and explaining things." The question hit Emma like a gentle but unexpected wave.
She glanced at Daniel, who was sketching something in a small notebook while keeping one eye on their conversation. "I suppose I've never met the right person to have children with," Emma answered carefully. "What makes someone the right person?" Lily asked, with the directness that made every conversation with her both delightful and challenging. Emma considered this seriously, knowing that Lily deserved an honest answer. "Someone who would love the children as much as I would. Someone who would be kind and patient and put the family's happiness before everything else. Someone like your daddy." Daniel looked up from his sketching, their eyes meeting across the park bench. Something passed between them in that moment, not quite attraction, but recognition of shared values that hadn't existed in Emma's previous relationships with men who saw children as obligations rather than blessings. "My daddy is the best daddy," Lily agreed, matter-of-factly. "He reads to me every night and makes funny pancakes on Sundays and always knows how to fix things when they're broken." "He sounds perfect," Emma said softly, still holding Daniel's gaze. "Well, he can't fix everything," Lily amended with 8-year-old honesty. "He couldn't fix Mommy when she was hurt, but he fixed my heart when it was sad about missing her." The simple profundity of this statement hung in the air between them. Emma watched Daniel's expression grow tender as he looked at his daughter, and she understood that she was witnessing something sacred, the love between a father and child who had survived tremendous loss together. As autumn progressed into early winter, their Friday meetings expanded beyond the park. When Lily mentioned she missed going to movies because tickets were expensive, Emma suggested they have movie afternoons at her penthouse. The first time Daniel and Lily visited her apartment, Emma saw her home through their eyes and felt embarrassed by its excessive luxury. "Wow," Lily breathed, spinning in circles to take in the soaring ceilings and panoramic city views. "It's like a castle. Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," Emma admitted, suddenly conscious of how lonely that sounded. "That must be really quiet," Lily observed. "Don't you get scared at night without anyone to talk to?" Daniel shot Lily a look that suggested she might be being too personal, but Emma found the question refreshing. "I suppose I do get lonely. I never really thought about it until I met you and your daddy." They established a routine of movie afternoons followed by homemade dinners that Emma learned to cook with Lily's enthusiastic assistance. The little girl was a patient teacher, explaining why measuring ingredients mattered and demonstrating the proper way to stir pancake batter to avoid lumps. These cooking lessons became some of Emma's most treasured memories. Lily standing on a step stool at the kitchen island, flour in her hair, chattering about everything and nothing, while Daniel watched them both with an expression of quiet contentment. But it was during one of their quiet moments that Emma truly grasped the depth of what Daniel had lost and rebuilt. Lily had fallen asleep between them on the couch during a movie, and as Daniel carefully adjusted a blanket around his daughter, Emma noticed tears in his eyes. "She looks like Sarah when she sleeps," he said quietly. "Same peaceful expression, same way of curling up like a little cat." "Tell me about her," Emma said softly. "About Sarah." Daniel was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak about his late wife with the kind of reverence that made Emma understand why he had never seriously considered dating anyone since her death. Sarah had been his college sweetheart, his surgical residence study partner, his best friend. She had made their house feel like home with her garden and her cooking and her ability to make everyone around her feel loved and valued. "She would have liked you," Daniel said eventually. "Sarah always said the measure of a person wasn't what they had, but what they did with what they'd been given. You're finally figuring out how to use your gifts for something meaningful." "I'm trying," Emma replied, "but I feel like I'm learning everything backwards. Most people figure out what matters when they're young and build from there. I'm 29 and just discovering that everything I thought was important was actually hollow." "It's never too late to become who you're supposed to be," Daniel said, echoing something Sarah used to tell his patients' families. "And Lily thinks you're wonderful exactly as you are right now." Emma looked down at the sleeping child whose trust she had broken and earned back through patience and consistency. "She's teaching me what love looks like," she admitted. "Unconditional, forgiving, generous. I never learned that growing up." "Love isn't something you learn," Daniel said gently. "It's something you practice. And you're practicing every Friday when you show up for her, every time you listen to her stories, every time you choose her happiness over your own convenience." As winter deepened, Emma found herself making choices that would have been unthinkable months earlier. She declined social invitations that conflicted with their Friday traditions. She rearranged business meetings to attend Lily's school Christmas concert. She spent her weekends researching child-friendly activities and planning adventures that would make an 8-year-old smile. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by Patricia and Theodore Richardson. During a family dinner at their country club, Patricia made several pointed comments about Emma's new interests and unusual friendships. When Emma defended her relationship with the Thompson family, her father's response was predictably cold. "I trust you're not allowing sentimentality to interfere with your responsibilities to the company. The Richardson name carries certain expectations." "Maybe it's time those expectations evolved," Emma replied, surprising herself with her directness. "Maybe being a Richardson means using our resources to help families like the Thompsons instead of looking down on them." The tension at the dinner table was palpable, but Emma no longer cared about maintaining family harmony at the expense of her own growth. She had discovered something more valuable than her father's approval, the knowledge that she could be loved for who she was becoming rather than what she had inherited. That night, as Emma sat in her penthouse looking at photos from Lily's school concert on her phone, she realized that Daniel and Lily Thompson had given her something she had never possessed, a sense of belonging that wasn't based on wealth or status, but on genuine affection and shared values. For the first time in her life, Emma Richardson felt like she might actually deserve the love she was learning to give and receive. If you've ever experienced how children can transform your understanding of what really matters in life, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes the smallest people teach us the biggest lessons about love and family. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in February when Daniel called Emma at work, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Emma, I am at the emergency room with Lily. She collapsed at school during recess. They're running tests, but I can't lose her too." Emma's assistant found her 20 minutes later, standing in the executive bathroom, still wearing her designer suit, but with tears streaming down her face. Without explanation, Emma grabbed her purse and ran for the elevator, leaving behind a conference room full of investors who had flown in from New York for a crucial presentation about Richardson Global's quarterly projections. The pediatric emergency department at Denver Children's Hospital was a maze of worried parents, exhausted medical staff, and the kind of controlled chaos that Daniel knew all too well from his former life. Emma found him in the family waiting area, still wearing his Mountain View coffee apron, staring at his hands with the hollow expression of someone reliving his worst nightmare. "Any news?" Emma asked, settling beside him on the uncomfortable plastic chair. "They think it might be her heart," Daniel said quietly. "A congenital defect that's been developing slowly. The doctor said it's operable, but—" He gestured helplessly. "The surgery costs more than I make in 2 years, and my insurance from the coffee shop has a $20,000 deductible. Even if I worked every available shift at all 3 jobs, it would take me months to save that much money." Emma felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach. What happens if she doesn't have the surgery?
Her condition will deteriorate. Maybe slowly, maybe quickly. Children's hearts are unpredictable. Daniel's medical training made his explanation clinically precise, but Emma could hear the terror underneath his professional composure. "I've seen cases like this before. Without intervention, she could have 6 months or 6 years, but the quality of life—" He didn't need to finish. Emma understood that Lily's vibrant energy,
Her ability to skip through parks and climb playground equipment and dance around Emma's kitchen while making cookies could all disappear without proper treatment. "I'll pay for it," Emma said immediately. "Whatever it costs. However much the hospital wants, I'll write a check right now." Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with something that looked almost like anger. "No. Daniel, this is Lily's life we're talking about. This isn't the time for pride." "This isn't about pride," Daniel said firmly. "This is about what kind of man I want to be for my daughter. I won't have her grow up thinking that her life was bought and paid for by someone else's charity." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "So you'd rather risk losing her than accept help from someone who loves her?" The word hung between them, raw and honest, and surprising them both. Emma hadn't planned to use that word, hadn't even fully acknowledged the depth of her feelings for this small family that had transformed her understanding of what mattered. But watching Daniel struggle with impossible choices while Lily lay in a hospital bed had stripped away all pretense. "You don't understand," Daniel said, his voice softer but no less determined. "I've spent 3 years rebuilding some semblance of dignity after losing everything. I've worked every available hour to provide for Lily on my own terms. If I accept a handout now, especially from someone with your resources, what message does that send her about the value of hard work and self-reliance? It sends the message that people who love you help when you need it. It sends the message that accepting support isn't weakness, it's being part of a family." Before Daniel could respond, a doctor in surgical scrubs approached their corner of the waiting area. Dr. Amanda Chen looked to be about Emma's age, with kind eyes and the confident bearing of someone who spent her days making life-or-death decisions. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Dr. Chen, the pediatric cardiac surgeon. I've reviewed Lily's tests, and I have some information about her condition." Daniel stood immediately, his body tense with anticipation. Emma remained seated, suddenly uncertain whether she belonged in this conversation about medical decisions for a child who wasn't legally hers. "Please, sit," Dr. Chen said, gesturing for both of them to remain. "Lily has been asking for Miss Emma since she woke up from the sedation, so I assume you're important to her care team." Emma felt a rush of emotion at learning that Lily had asked for her. Even in her scared and confused state, the little girl had wanted Emma nearby. "Lily has a condition called bicuspid aortic valve with stenosis. Essentially, one of the valves in her heart was formed incorrectly and is becoming increasingly narrow, making it harder for blood to flow properly. The good news is that this is completely treatable with surgery. The challenging news is that we need to act relatively quickly." "How quickly?" "I'd recommend surgery within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Any longer and we risk complications that could make the procedure more complex." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "And the cost?" Dr. Chen glanced between Daniel and Emma with the practiced assessment of someone who had dealt with insurance complications many times before. "The total cost for surgery, hospital stay, and follow-up care would be approximately $85,000. With your current insurance, you'd be responsible for about $35,000 out of pocket." Emma watched Daniel's shoulders sag with the weight of impossible mathematics. $35,000 might as well have been $35 million for someone working multiple minimum wage jobs while supporting a child alone. "Doctor," Emma said carefully, "what are the payment options? Can the hospital work with families on extended payment plans?" "We do have financial assistance programs," Dr. Chen replied diplomatically. "But given the timeline, we'd need to see some financial commitment up front to schedule the surgery." After Dr. Chen left, Daniel and Emma sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I need to make some calls. See if I can pick up extra shifts, maybe find a 4th job." His voice was hollow, already knowing that the mathematics didn't work. "Daniel, please," Emma said quietly, "let me help. Not as charity, but as someone who loves Lily and wants her to have the chance to grow up healthy and happy." "And what happens after the surgery?
What happens when she needs new clothes or school supplies or a bicycle for her birthday? Do I call you every time I can't afford something she needs? Do I teach her that Emma Richardson is our family's personal ATM? Emma felt tears building again, frustrated by Daniel's stubborn independence, even as she admired the principles behind it. What if there was another way? What if I could help without it feeling like charity? There isn't another way, Daniel said definitively. I either find a way to pay for this myself or I accept that I've failed as a father. You haven't failed, Emma said fiercely. You've done everything humanly possible to take care of her. Sometimes accepting help isn't giving up. It's being smart enough to put your child's needs above your own ego.
As they sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by the quiet desperation of other families facing medical crises, Emma realized that this moment would define not just Lily's future, but the future of their unlikely family. She had found something more precious than all the Richardson wealth combined, but if she couldn't convince Daniel to let her help save Lily's life, she might lose both of them forever. The irony was devastating. Emma finally understood what it meant to love someone unconditionally, to put another person's welfare above her own comfort, to want to use her privilege for something meaningful. But the very independence and integrity that made Daniel such an extraordinary father might also be the qualities that prevented her from being able to protect the child they both loved. Somewhere in this hospital, Lily Thompson was waiting for the adults in her life to figure out how to save her. And Emma Richardson, who had been taught that money could solve any problem, was learning that some of life's most important challenges couldn't be resolved with a checkbook alone. 3 days after Lily's diagnosis, Emma Richardson sat across from her father in his mahogany-paneled office on the 42nd floor of Richardson Tower, preparing to have the most important conversation of her life. Theodore Richardson looked up from his quarterly reports with the same cold efficiency he brought to every interaction, even with his own daughter. "You missed the Hartford Development presentation," he said without preamble. "James Morrison flew in from New York specifically to meet with you about the casino project. Do you have any idea how that made our company look? A child I care about was in the hospital. I had more important things to worry about than impressing investors." Theodore's expression hardened. "Emma, I've been patient with your recent distractions, but this friendship with a coffee shop worker and his daughter is beginning to interfere with your professional responsibilities. Perhaps it's time to refocus your priorities." "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about my priorities." Emma pulled out a folder she had spent the previous night preparing. "I want to liquidate my trust fund." The silence that followed was so complete that Emma could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. Theodore set down his pen with deliberate precision, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Excuse me? I want to convert my entire inheritance into liquid assets and establish an independent foundation focused on medical assistance for working families, starting with a $35,000 grant for a little girl who needs heart surgery." Theodore stood abruptly, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of downtown Denver. "This is about that man, isn't it? This Daniel Thompson. You're planning to throw away everything your grandfather built for a man who serves coffee for a living." "This is about understanding what wealth is actually for," Emma replied, her voice growing stronger. "Grandfather started with nothing and built this empire because he wanted to provide security for his family. Somehow, 3 generations later, we've turned that security into a wall that keeps us from connecting with anyone real." "Real?" Theodore's voice was dangerous now. "You think your life isn't real? You think the education we provided, the opportunities we've given you, the foundation we've built for your future, none of that is real?" "It's real, but it's not mine. I never earned any of it. I never chose it. I never had to sacrifice for it or fight for it or prove I deserved it. And because of that, I never learned what actually matters."
Theodore turned back to face her, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like disappointment. And you think throwing away $47 million to impress a widowed father will teach you what matters? I'm not trying to impress Daniel. In fact, he'll probably be furious when he finds out what I've done. But his daughter needs surgery, and there are thousands of other children whose families are facing the same impossible choice between financial ruin and their child's health. If I can't use my privilege to help them, then what's the point of having it? The point, Theodore said coldly, is maintaining the Richardson legacy, building generational wealth, ensuring that our family remains influential and relevant for the next century. Your grandfather understood this. Your mother understood it before she died. Mom understood duty, Emma corrected, but I don't think she ever understood happiness. And I won't spend the rest of my life following a blueprint that prioritizes wealth over genuine human connection. Theodore walked back to his desk, his movements controlled, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. If you liquidate your trust fund, you will no longer be welcome in this office or this company. You will be choosing to make yourself a stranger to your own family. The threat hung in the air between them, and Emma felt a familiar flutter of fear. This was the rejection she had been trained to avoid since childhood, the withdrawal of approval that had shaped every decision she had ever made. But as she sat in this expensive office, thinking about Limmy's bright smile and Daniel's quiet strength, she realized that fear no longer had power over her. "Then I guess I'm choosing to be a stranger," Emma said quietly, "because the family I want to belong to measures success in love given and received, not in quarterly profit reports." That afternoon, Emma met with her personal attorney to begin the complex process of dissolving her trust fund. The legal mechanics would take several weeks to complete, but she arranged for an immediate personal loan against her assets to cover Lily's surgery costs. She structured the payment to appear as though it came from a hospital charity program, knowing that Daniel's pride would never allow him to accept direct financial assistance from her.
The hardest part was explaining her decision to Daniel and Lily without revealing the full scope of what she had sacrificed. She found them at the hospital during visiting hours, where Lily was waiting for her surgery date while undergoing additional cardiac monitoring. "Miss Emma!" Lily's face lit up when she saw her enter the pediatric ward. Despite the monitor wires and hospital gown, the 8-year-old spirit remained undaunted. "Look, I drew you a picture of us having a tea party when I get out of the hospital." Emma's throat tightened as she studied the crayon drawing that showed 3 stick figures, clearly labeled Daddy, Lily, and Miss Emma, sitting around a table covered with heart-shaped cookies. In the corner of the paper, Lily had written, "My family," in careful block letters. "It's beautiful," Emma managed, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. "I can't wait for that tea party." Daniel approached more cautiously, his eyes searching Emma's face for signs of the tension that had marked their last conversation. "The hospital called this morning. They said a charitable foundation approved emergency funding for Lily's surgery. Apparently, we qualified for some kind of hardship grant that covers the entire out-of-pocket cost." Emma kept her expression carefully neutral. "That's wonderful news. When is the surgery scheduled?" "Friday morning. Dr. Chen says the procedure should take about 4 hours. Daniel's voice carried a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "I still can't believe we qualified for the grant. The financial counselor said applications for that program usually take months to process." "Sometimes good things happen when we need them most," Emma said, reaching over to squeeze Lily's hand. "Your daddy has been working so hard to take care of you. Maybe the universe decided it was time to help." "Miss Emma, will you be here when I wake up from my surgery?" Lily asked, with the directness that never failed to touch Emma's heart. Emma glanced at Daniel, unsure whether she was still welcome in such an intimate family moment. When he nodded slightly, she felt a rush of gratitude that surprised her with its intensity. "If your daddy says it's okay, I'll be right here waiting for you."
"Of course it's okay," Daniel said softly. "You're part of our family now." The word family hit Emma with unexpected force. She thought about the conversation with her father, about the trust fund she was liquidating, and about the choice she had made to prioritize love over legacy. For the first time since making that decision, she felt completely certain she had chosen correctly. As Emma sat in the hospital room watching Daniel read a bedtime story to Lily while medical equipment beeped softly in the background, Emma realized that she had found something more valuable than all the Richardson wealth combined. She had found her people, a widowed father who worked 3 jobs to provide for his daughter, and an 8-year-old girl who drew pictures of tea parties and labeled strangers as family based on love rather than blood. Tomorrow, she would have to face the consequences of defying her father and abandoning the Richardson legacy. She would have to navigate a world where her safety net of inherited wealth no longer existed. But tonight, sitting in this hospital room with the 2 people who had taught her what family actually meant, Emma Richardson had never felt richer in her life. The little girl who had once asked why Emma didn't have children was about to discover that sometimes families aren't born, they're chosen, one act of love at a time. And sometimes the greatest inheritance you can leave behind isn't money, but the example of choosing compassion over convention, connection over comfort, and love over everything else that the world says should matter more. 6 months after Lily's successful heart surgery, Emma Richardson sat on a worn couch in the small apartment in Westwood that had become more home to her than her penthouse ever was. Lily, now 9 years old and full of the boundless energy that the surgery had restored, was teaching Emma how to braid friendship bracelets while Daniel prepared dinner in their tiny kitchen. "You have to pull it tighter, Miss Emma," Lily instructed with the patient authority of a child who had mastered a skill that adults found challenging. "If it's too loose, it won't stay pretty when we wear it to school." Emma followed the little girl's directions carefully, marveling at how this simple apartment, with its thrift store furniture, crayon drawings covering the refrigerator, and the persistent scent of whatever inexpensive but delicious meal Daniel was creating, felt more like family than the mansion where she had grown up. The past 6 months had brought changes none of them could have anticipated. Emma's trust fund liquidation had finalized in April, creating the Thompson Medical Foundation, which had already provided emergency medical assistance to 47 families across Colorado. The foundation operated from a modest office space, with Emma serving as its unpaid director, and Daniel, who had completed an online nonprofit management certification, as her assistant. "Dinner's ready," Daniel called from the kitchen, and Emma felt the familiar warmth that came with being included in their evening routine. She had been having dinner with them 3 nights a week since Lily's recovery, and each time she was struck by how this family of 3 functioned with such natural ease. As they sat around the small dining table that doubled as Lily's homework workspace, Emma watched Daniel serve portions with the careful attention of someone who still calculated every grocery dollar, even though Emma had been quietly supplementing their income through foundation consulting fees that allowed Daniel to reduce his work schedule to just 2 jobs.
"Miss Emma," Lily said between bites of Daniel's homemade spaghetti sauce, "Jessica at school asked me why you don't live with us if you're my family. I told her families don't have to live in the same house, but she said that's weird." Emma glanced at Daniel, who was focused intently on his plate. This question had been hanging in the air for weeks, unspoken but present in every shared moment, every lingering goodbye, every time Emma returned to her empty penthouse after an evening of warmth and belonging. "What do you think makes someone family, Lily?" Emma asked carefully. "People who love each other and take care of each other and want to be together. Like how you took care of me when I was sick, and how Daddy takes care of both of us, and how we all take care of each other." The simple wisdom of this definition hung in the air as Daniel finally looked up from his plate, his dark eyes meeting Emma's with an intensity that made her heart race. "Lily's right," Daniel said quietly. "We are a family, and maybe it's time we stopped pretending otherwise." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Daniel, "Let me finish," he said gently. For months, I've been trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude, that my feelings aren't real because they started during a crisis, or because of the difference in our backgrounds, or because I was afraid of betraying Sarah's memory." Emma held her breath, afraid to hope for what she thought she might be hearing. "But watching you with Lily, seeing how you've completely rearranged your life to be part of ours, witnessing the way you've chosen us over everything you were raised to value, that's not gratitude, that's love. And Sarah would be the first person to tell me I'm an idiot if I let fear keep me from building a life with someone who makes both Lily and me happy." "Does this mean Emma can move in with us?" Lily asked, with the directness that never failed to make both adults laugh. "That depends," Daniel said, and standing up to walk to a small drawer in their kitchen. "Emma, I know this isn't the proposal you probably imagined when you were a little girl. I don't have expensive ring or a fancy restaurant reservation, but I do have something I think is more valuable." He pulled out a small velvet box that looked like it had been treasured for many years. This was Sarah's grandmother's ring. Sarah always said she wanted it to go to someone who understood that marriage isn't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing someone every day, especially when life gets difficult. Emma's hand shook as Daniel opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful antique ring with a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. "Emma Richardson, will you marry us?" Daniel asked, gesturing to include Lily in the proposal. "Will you choose to build a life where love matters more than money, where family is defined by commitment rather than convenience, and where an 8-year-old's happiness is more important than any board meeting or social obligation?" "Yes," Emma whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes!" As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Lily jumped up from her chair and wrapped both adults in an enthusiastic hug. "Now we can have that tea party I drew in the hospital, and Emma can help me with my math homework, and Daddy won't be sad anymore when he thinks I'm not looking." Emma laughed through her tears, holding tight to the two people who had taught her what really mattered. The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. 2 months later, Emma Thompson, she had legally changed her name the week after their engagement, stood in the small garden behind Daniel's apartment building, wearing a simple white dress that had cost less than her old designer handbags, surrounded by the most important people in their lives. Mrs. Chen from next door had offered her garden for the ceremony, and Mia from the coffee shop had made the cake. Lily served as both flower girl and ring bearer, wearing a yellow dress she had picked out herself, and a huge smile that outshone any expensive wedding decoration. The guest list was small but meaningful. Co-workers from Daniel's various jobs, neighbors who had become friends, families from the foundation who had driven hours to attend, and Dr. Amanda Chen, who had become a close friend during Lily's recovery. Notably absent were Theodore and Patricia Richardson, though Emma felt only relief at their absence rather than sadness. "Do you, Emma, take Daniel and Lily to be your family?" asked Pastor Williams from the community church where Lily attended Sunday school, his adaptation of traditional vows bringing tears to many of the assembled guests. "I do," Emma said, looking first at Daniel, then down at Lily, who was beaming up at her with pure joy. "Do you, Daniel, take Emma to be your wife and Lily's mother?" "I do," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And do you, Lily, accept Emma as your new mommy?" "I do," Lily announced loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, causing everyone to laugh and several people to wipe their eyes. As they exchanged rings in their first kiss as a married couple, Emma thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she was a lonely heiress, living in emotional isolation, measuring her worth by her bank account and her father's approval. Now she was a wife and mother, living in a 2-bedroom apartment and working for a nonprofit that operated on donated funds and volunteer energy.
She had never been happier. That evening, as they celebrated at the reception in the community center that Lily's school used for special events, Emma danced with her new daughter to a song playing on a borrowed sound system, surrounded by friends who valued her for her heart rather than her trust fund. "Mommy Emma," Lily said, the title still new enough to make Emma's heart skip. Are you sad that your daddy isn't here? Emma looked down at the little girl who had taught her what unconditional love looked like. I'm not sad at all, sweetheart, because I learned something very important. The family you choose is more important than the family you're born into, and I choose you and Daddy every single day. As the evening wound down and they prepared to go home to their small apartment filled with love and laughter and the promise of tomorrow's ordinary miracles, Emma realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for her entire life without even knowing it. She had found her real family, and it was worth more than all the Richardson money could ever buy. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments what family means to you, and remember to subscribe for more incredible stories about choosing love over everything else. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can leave behind isn't money, but the example of putting people before profits and love before legacy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.